Good morning and welcome to our public workshop. Today we'll be discussing proposed amendments to the Advanced Clean Trucks Regulation. The purpose of today's workshop is to discuss expedited changes that are non-substantial, administrative in nature, and minor adjustments to the regulation that improve clarity, smooth implementation, and meet commitments made in the Clean Truck Partnership. I'm Jerry Baruman, and I'm part of the management team for the Advanced Clean Trucks Regulation. I'm joined today by several of my colleagues, including Tony Brazil, Paul Arnasia, and our lead staff, Kat Talamantes, who will be giving our presentation this morning. Before we begin, I want to let everyone know that this is a hybrid meeting. That means that participants can attend in person or remotely via Zoom. It is being recorded and will be made available on our website. This meeting is scheduled to end at noon today. Our intention for today's meeting is to allow for open communication and solicit feedback. The preliminary draft language was made available on November 3rd with underlined strikeout and can be found on our website. The changes will be summarized in our presentation. For those attending in person, restrooms are located outside these doors and to your left. And in the event of a fire alarm, please remain calm and listen to the instructions given over the intercom. If we are asked to evacuate this building, please do so by using the stairs, not the elevators, and following instructions from building security personnel. To exit, we use the main entrance and relocate at the park across the street. Kat Talamantes will now walk us through today's presentation. Take it away, Kat.
Thanks, Jerry. Hi, everyone. My name is Kat Talamantes, and I will be taking us through today's presentation. So I'll start by providing background information, followed by a summary of the proposed amendments, and then finish the presentation by discussing next steps. Beginning with some background information, the Advanced Clean Trucks Regulation was adopted in January 2021 to accelerate commercial deployment of zero-emission vehicles, or ZEVs, and contribute towards meeting the state's air quality and climate mitigation targets. The regulation establishes requirements for medium and heavy-duty manufacturers to sell an increasing portion of their sales as zero-emission starting in the 2024 model year and ramping up through 2035. It additionally provides flexibility to make up a deficit within one model year and the ability for manufacturers to bank and trade credits. In July of 2023, CARB announced a Clean Truck Partnership Agreement with the nation's leading major truck manufacturers that advances the development of ZEVs for the trucking industry and provides flexibility for manufacturers to meet emissions requirements while reaching the state's climate and emission reduction goals. The agreement marks a commitment from the manufacturers to meet California's vehicle standards that will require the sale and adoption of zero-emission technology in the state, including complying with the 100% zero-emission sales requirement by 2036 set forth by the recently adopted Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation. Regardless of whether any other entity challenges California's authority to set more stringent emission standards under the Federal Clean Air Act. In the Clean Truck Partnership Agreement, CARB agreed to initiate a rulemaking action in calendar year 2024 to clarify that compliance determination and sales reporting requirements for the ACT regulation are both defined when vehicles are produced and delivered for sale in California. Additionally, staff agreed to lengthen the number of years a manufacturer has to make up a deficit from one model year to 3 years under the ACT regulation. This slide provides a basic timeline of the elements agreed to by CARB staff in the Clean Truck Partnership Agreement. The purpose of today's workshop is to go over preliminary changes to the regulatory text for the proposed amendments to the ACT regulation for items that can be expedited and are scheduled for consideration in March 2024. The final rulemaking package will then be due in September of 2024. We will also be holding workshops on the potential concept of ZEV credit pooling between states that have adopted the ACT regulation in addition to the role of hydrogen in medium and heavy-duty vehicles later this month, which are items that would take longer to adopt and are therefore not being discussed today, nor are they part of this rulemaking. The proposed amendments are part of an expedited process that would make minor adjustments to the ACT regulation to address issues that have arisen through the regulation's implementation, will ensure closer alignment with the original intent of the regulation, and fulfill commitments in 2024 agreed to by CARB staff in the Clean Truck Partnership. These amendments are generally non-substantial administrative changes that have minimal cost impacts and no emissions impact. I will now be going over an overview for each proposed change to the regulatory text. Starting with section 1963, staff is proposing to add in new definitions for battery electric vehicle, complete vehicle, hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicle, incomplete vehicle, and secondary vehicle manufacturer. The addition of these definitions coincide with other proposed changes related to the reporting and record-keeping requirements, as well as the scope of the regulated parties to provide clarity to these associated changes. And these changes will be discussed in more detail later in the presentation. Moving on to section 1963.1, staff is proposing to remove requirements for manufacturers to track when vehicles reach the ultimate purchaser and instead specify that deficits and credits are incurred when a new on-road vehicle is produced and delivered for sale in California. This proposed change is in the Clean Truck Partnership Agreement and removes burden on manufacturers to track vehicles once they leave their facility and shifts it to CARB staff. The proposed changes in this section also include language that clarifies that a vehicle is only eligible to generate deficits once to ensure that manufacturers do not accrue excessive and unintended deficits for a single vehicle. In section 1963.2, staff is proposing similar changes as in section 1963.1 to remove requirements for manufacturers to track when vehicles reach the ultimate purchaser and instead clarify that deficits are incurred when a new on-road vehicle is produced and delivered for sale in California. This updated language also clarifies that a vehicle only earns credits or deficits once. Staff is proposing changes to establish that for non-chassis certified medium-duty ZEVs, manufacturers may certify to the requirements of the zero-emission vehicle standards for 2018 through 2025 model year passenger cars, light-duty trucks, and medium-duty vehicles, otherwise known as Title 13, California Code of Regulations, Section 1962.2, to satisfy the zero-emission powertrain certification requirement. This change prevents manufacturers from unnecessarily certifying to both sets of requirements for these vehicles. We are also making changes to better align with the recent changes made in the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulations for Class 2B through 3 vehicles. Beginning with the 2026 model year, medium-duty ZEVs produced and delivered for sale in California that are counted towards the ACC2 regulations will not be counted towards the ZEV deficit generated under the ACT regulation. This updated language coincides with the same requirement under Section 1964.2 I-7A of ACC2. In Section 1963.3, staff is proposing to increase the deficit makeup period from 1 model year to 3 model years. To be eligible for this flexibility, the net deficit balance must be 20% or less of the deficits generated from the most recent model year. This 3 model year period begins with the first model year in which the manufacturer had a net deficit. For example, if a fleet accrues a deficit for the 2027 model year, the deficit must be made up by the end of the 2029 model year. The net deficit balance must also decrease each model year, and the entire deficit must be offset by the end of the 3 model year period. Additionally, a manufacturer is not permitted to transfer credits to another manufacturer while making up a deficit through this flexibility. Staff is proposing the addition of a new section to establish the basis for initial and ultimate compliance determination as the reported sales of vehicles delivered for sale in California and the actual sales of vehicles delivered to the ultimate purchaser and placed in service in California, respectively. This change also establishes that by the end of each model year, compliance is achieved when the cumulative credits exceed the total net deficits retired in prior model years. Moving on to section 1963.4, staff is proposing to incorporate additional information and modify existing reporting requirements. These changes include reporting the vehicle weight class category as opposed to the gross vehicle weight rating, the vehicle family name, indicating whether the vehicle type is a tractor, yard tractor, excluded bus, school bus, cutaway vehicle, or other, using the term advanced technology type instead of the term drivetrain, and distinguishing whether the vehicle is a complete or incomplete vehicle. Continuing from the last slide, the updated reporting requirements include the latest status of delivery into California, the name of the person or entity that is the vehicle's recipient, and the physical address of the vehicle's last known delivery destination. Next, staff is proposing an optional 180 calendar day period to correct or update information submitted under the initial 90-day report for consistency with the heavy-duty engine and vehicle omnibus regulation and the heavy-duty greenhouse gas certification program. Staff is also proposing to remove the grouped sales reporting option to instead require that each vehicle be reported individually. Staff is proposing to identify the acceptable documentation for tracking vehicle sales. These documents include an invoice, receipt, contract, or purchase order with a delivery destination to a dealership in California, to an ultimate purchaser in California, or to a secondary vehicle manufacturer who has an order from a purchaser to receive the vehicle in California. Continuing from the last slide, the acceptable documentation includes documentation from a secondary vehicle manufacturer showing delivery of the manufacturer's vehicle in California, a statement from the secondary vehicle manufacturer indicating delivery of the complete vehicle to a dealership, reseller, or ultimate purchaser in California, and a purchase order from the fleet owner showing delivery to California. The specification of these documents is necessary to ensure appropriate documentation is available for CARB staff to audit for rule enforcement. In section 1963.5, staff is proposing to subject secondary vehicle manufacturers to audit in order to verify the accuracy of a manufacturer's reported vehicle tracking information, if applicable. And lastly, staff is proposing the addition of new section 1963.6 titled 2036 and subsequent model year requirements. This new section establishes that 2036 and subsequent model year medium and heavy duty ZEVs are subject to the 100% medium and heavy duty zero emissions vehicle sales requirements, starting with the 2036 model year to better align with the requirements of the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. And finally, for next steps, staff will be holding 2 separate workshops on the potential concept of ZEV credit pooling across states that have adopted the ACT regulation, in addition to the role of hydrogen in medium and heavy duty vehicles later this month on November 28th. And as a reminder, these concepts are not being included in this expedited rulemaking. The initial statement of reasons package for the proposed amendments is to be released for formal comments in January of 2024, and the board hearing will take place in March of 2024. So we will now move on to the discussion of the proposal, and you may also submit written comments for staff consideration by email at actreporting@arb.ca.gov by November 27th. So I will now turn it over to Paul.
Thanks, Kat. So again, just to reiterate, a part of the changes we're making today are part of the Clean Truck Partnership that we work with the manufacturers to agree, and we'll continue to work with the manufacturers, make sure we can come up with something that we're all happy to live with. So now we'll go to the in-person speakers. So we have some in person today and some online. So I'll read off the list of those who signed up in person. Yeah, I'll do that after. Okay. Okay, yeah. So first, I'll call on Jed Mandel, and he'll speak. After that, we'll go to the in-person speakers and then the rest of the online speakers. So it's giving me the option to chat, but not unmute. Jed, give me a second.
That's some technical difficulty.
Okay, Jed, you should be able to unmute and begin speaking.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a feature that CARB wants to have, is the ability to keep put me on mute the whole time. It's perfect. Thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to make a couple of comments. We are very appreciative of the staff's efforts to follow up on the Clean Trucks partnership. And there are two elements of that partnership agreement that are the subject of today's workshop, which is extending the one-year credit reporting period to 3 years and changing the definitions for credit reporting and accounting purposes from sale to the ultimate purchaser to produced and delivered for sale. We are, in all candor, we're still sort of studying the details of the regulatory text that's being proposed. We intend to get back to you with some comments. We may have some concerns as to whether the intent of the Clean Truck Partnership is actually being implemented, but we will let you know what those specifics are. And again, in the spirit of that partnership, look forward to working with you on the finalization of these regs. But for today's purposes, really wanted to thank you for so quickly moving forward in your efforts to implement those elements of the agreement. We appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And we look forward to working with you as we move through this. Okay, and now we'll go to the in-person speakers. So first we have Brian Hedman, then Greg Herner, and then Cynthia Webb. So we'll just keep calling as we move through these. So we have a podium up front at my left over here. So. Oh, okay. Thanks, then Greg Herner.
Thank you. I realize these comments are, and we've discussed with the staff that these comments are a little bit outside of this rulemaking, but we felt that it was important to be on record. My name is Greg Herner, and I'm appearing on behalf of Miller Industries, Inc. Miller Industries is a manufacturer of towing and recovery vehicles and equipment. They typically produce about 1,000 units annually of diverse sizes and configurations for the California market. Most of these units are purchased by small businesses in California that are not subject to the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation, as they have less than 50 vehicles in the fleet. All towing and recovery companies support California's first responders and emergency personnel in clearing roads after accidents or mechanical breakdowns. The sooner that roads are reopened, the fewer emissions produced from idling vehicles and the reduced impact to the state's economy from missed productivity. Quickly clearing accidents and vehicles with mechanical failures also allows commuters to return home to their families sooner. While most of the towers that are destined for California are not subject to the ACF, the changes to the Advanced Clean Trucks rule and agreement with manufacturers will have an impact on the availability of chassis for the tow and recovery industry. The manufacturers that have provided estimates have indicated that Miller Industries will receive less than 30% of the requested units to fulfill the known needs of towing and recovery companies in California. While we understand that the regulation is designed to create the flexibilities negotiated by manufacturers to meet their agreement with California Air Resources Board, it is imperative that CARB ensure that the needs of industries that do not yet have ZEV alternatives available are still able to meet the needs of California customers. Limiting availability of specialty configurations will have a significant impact on the California economy, and in the case of the tow and recovery industry, create safety impacts for first responders and the public. We encourage CARB to create language in the ACT revision that provides a path for secondary manufacturers to obtain sufficient chassis for configuration and allowed additional time under the ACF. The ACF allows the EO to designate configurations that will be delayed in transitioning to near ZEV or ZEV until the technology can meet the performance requirements and energy capacity needs. Alternatively, tow and recovery vehicles should be designated as emergency vehicles, giving their critical importance to supporting first responders and clearing roads after accidents or mechanical failures. Tow and recovery are a life, health, and safety issue that must be fully addressed in the regulation. The importance of tow and recovery vehicles is partially recognized in the existing regulation. However, it only applies the exemption to those tow vehicles that are owned by state or bridge and highway districts under Vehicle Code Section 165. Allowing an exemption to those assisting the public and emergency personnel in those limited circumstances, but not providing the same consideration for prompt service and safety to the first responders and the public on all roadways in California makes no sense and cannot be defended. The ability to respond on rural roads and highways in mountainous areas often requires more significant energy capacity for both travel and for the recovery of vehicles, necessitating that the public and those responding to all roadways be treated equally. The adequacy of tow and recovery network to support motorists and first responders is not trivial in its impact. There are over 1,200 crashes per day in California, and likely a similar number of mechanical breakdowns. First responders are most at risk while responding and waiting alongside roadways until victims are transported and the tow and recovery can be completed. Often a crash leads to additional crashes, and especially in congested areas or in extreme weather. TRIP, a national transportation research nonprofit, documented that Californians suffer annual economic impacts of over $29 billion per year from congestion and another $10 billion per year from safety. And these impacts are low as the study only focused on areas where poor road maintenance was a contributing factor. A total of 39 billion impacts, not to mention the potential for additional accidents and the loss of life during the delay in clearing accidents and mechanical breakdowns, makes the tow and recovery industry critical to life, health, and safety. This provides ample justification for CARB to extend to private tow and recovery companies the same consideration extended to tow and recovery vehicles owned by the state and highway and bridge districts, and that is also extended to public and private emergency vehicles. The governor has acknowledged and supported maintaining traditional medium and heavy duty vehicles when necessary to respond to foreseeable events to maintain essential services. On October 8th of this year, the governor signed AB 1594 by Assembly Member Eduardo Garcia to ensure that medium and heavy duty vehicles remain available for electric utility, water, and wastewater providers. The tow and recovery industry are responding to daily foreseeable life and health and safety events. This necessitates providing similar consideration for the tow and recovery industries to work with CARB to identify vehicles that need additional time to transition. I appreciate your time, and Miller Industries stands ready to work with CARB to identify a solution that supports our first responders and the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have, no, for since we have Manoj. Okay. Anyone else in the room? All right, I'll go to the online commenters. We have one hand raised from Christian Corby. I've given you permission to speak. If you can unmute and begin.
Yes, good morning. I just wanted to say, oh yeah, I should introduce myself. My name is Christian Corby. I'm the Deputy Executive Director at the California Electric Transportation Coalition, or CalETC. Just wanted to thank CARB staff for these changes. I know this was a long work between you and the trucking industry and auto industry to get to some very important changes that'll really help the ACT rule function. And I really appreciate that work, especially the change away from sale to the ultimate purchaser and extending the deficit makeup period to 3 years. So yeah, well done. Thank you again, and I'll check in with my automaker members and see if we would like to provide any additional substantive comments. So thank you.
Thank you, Christian, and we'd appreciate any feedback your members would have. Okay, we have one more hand raised from Kirk Blackburn. So I've given you permission to speak, Kirk. It says you're muted on your end, so you would need to unmute yourself and then give your name and affiliation.
Thank you. This is Kirk Blackburn here on behalf of the California Tow Truck Association, CTTA, which is known nationally as Emergency Road Service Coalition of America, or ERSCA. CTTA is the largest towing nonprofit association in the world, representing near 1,000 emergency roadside responders and towing companies within California and throughout the country. CTTA shares the concerns about the ACT regulation that were expressed by Miller Industries, which manufactures much of the towing and recovery equipment used by CTTA's members. As explained, the mandates contained in the ACT rule will drastically impact the availability of chassis for all tow trucks. As there are no known commercially available ZEV tow trucks for sale capable of performing the same work done by traditional tow trucks, and no clear indication that any manufacturers have plans to develop any such ZEV tow trucks anytime in the future. The lack of availability for any tow trucks creates a dire problem for the tow industry and the motoring public that they serve. Without a sufficient number of tow trucks on California roads, accidents, breakdowns, and impounds will remain uncleared. Number of secondary accidents increase, the amount of emissions from idling vehicles increase, and lost productivity from increased traffic will hit the state's economy. To avoid this crisis, CTTA also encourages CARB to include in the ACT rule a provision similar to the ACF's ZEV purchase exemption, allowing CARB's executive officer to designate that certain vehicle configurations, like tow trucks, be delayed in transitioning to ZEV vehicles until they are available. Alternatively, CARB could exempt all tow trucks as emergency vehicles under the ACT rule due to the critical life and property saving service being provided, plus the unpredictable timing of such emergency events. Thanks for your attention to this critical issue directly impacting roadside responders and the motoring public that they serve.
Thank you, Kirk. And so there are no more hands raised online and no one left to speak in the building. So I think we're done here today.
Yeah, and I guess while if anybody is thinking of a thought, I have a few just statements, I guess, to make. Because right now that's kind of the main issue right now is the tow truck concern. But you're basically saying even fleets that are not regulated you're not going to have vehicles for them because the manufacturers are telling you they're not going to give you as many trucks that are conventional diesels or gas trucks. Just because of this rule, though, is the part that is the part I'm missing, because the manufacturers can sell whichever vehicles they want to be zero emission. And we did post online the information that we received through 2022 that shows that we're pretty much already meeting the 24 requirement. And more recently, if you've seen some of the announcements, if you actually project forward, we're probably going to have more than double and potentially triple the credits that you actually need to comply. So I'm having a hard time tying it to this rule. And frankly, if any of the manufacturers want to weigh in, I appreciate that too. But yeah, feel free to.
Yeah. So Greg Erner and Tony, and we appreciate the previous conversation with you and your staff on this. And we recognize, and that was my opening comment, is I recognize it's not directly what you're working on in this very narrow regulation, but we felt it important to bring this forward and have a discussion about it and be on the record, because what Miller is hearing from OEMs is that they're not going to, they are going to, and I'm not saying that this is across all OEMs, only heard from a couple, but that they're suggesting that after the initial allocation that they're able to provide ICE vehicles for, that they would have to purchase 10% ZEVs to acquire additional ICE engines. That is very problematic in an industry that doesn't have alternatives at this time. And if they end up having to do that, they're going to have to spread the cost of that ZEV across those other 9. And that's going to increase the cost of units sold in California. We're not the OEM. Miller is not the OEM. They do not know the inside details of what their projections are on where they're going to be able to sell, ZEV compliant vehicles and how many of those. Do understand that there are certain like dredge that are going first, and there should be a significant number of units in that area. But we are, because we've had these messages from a couple of the OEMs, we definitely wanted to bring it forward and have a discussion and see if there's ways that we can look at to try and make sure that we can address this so that we don't either short the market in California or unduly increase the cost by having to spread an unused ZEV chassis across other ICE chassis. And the really problematic situation for Miller is that you can't just jump from one manufacturer to the other. They're all for their power takeoff units and for their size and configurations. They're all unique in how they're doing it. So they're not swappable between OEMs.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, we've got 3 more hands raised online, which I'll go to. So first we have Scott Conlon, and after that, Dean Taylor. So Scott, I've given you permission to speak. If you can give your name and affiliation.
Hi, my name is Scott Conlon. I'm the National Fleet Program Manager for the USDA Forest Service. I was a little bit late to the party in terms of having read through all the materials, but my staff just made me aware of this meeting today. I wanted to just echo some of the concerns I've already heard expressed by folks representing the OEM towing and towing industry regarding the need for that industry to support the ability to remove vehicles from remote locations. Obviously, the USDA Forest Service has a huge presence in California and is engaged in wildland firefighting in pretty remote areas. I guess I have quite a few concerns about the number of contractors that may be affected by the regulations that actually provide vehicles in support of wildland firefighting operations. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Scott. Next, we have Dean Taylor and then James Wheeler. So Dean, I've given you permission to speak. If you can give your name and affiliation.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dean Taylor, an independent consultant, just trying to understand some things. So these are just clarifying questions. Can you talk more about secondary manufacturer? Who does that impact? Because I see it mentioned like 8 times in the proposed regulation changes.
Kath, we did add a definition for that, is that right? Yeah, I think in general, the secondary manufacturer would typically be the body manufacturer. So whoever takes the incomplete chassis from the manufacturer, upfits the body onto it, and then ultimately delivers it to the customer or the ultimate purchaser.
And then, so I heard also mention of EPTOs. I mean, that's a pretty big industry, tens of thousands of them sold each year in California. Is that covered by this, by either ACT or ACF, or how is that? How would the EPTO, industry be affected?
So right now, the advanced clean trucks in our advanced clean fleets regulation has 3 categories of well, I guess 2 categories of vehicles. Zero emission vehicles to include battery, electric, and fuel cell, and what we call NZEVs, near zero emission vehicles, which are plug-in hybrids that meet the minimum all-electric range requirement. At the moment, neither of these programs give credit for EPTO systems, so they would be treated the same as other combustion vehicles. We do have some incentive funding available, I believe, for EPTO systems, so that is one avenue available. But in terms of these regulations, we are really trying to get zero-emission powertrains on the road.
Yeah, if it helps, because our funding programs have funded EPTO systems on conventional trucks. Feedback. But in terms of EPTO, there's nothing specific to the manufacturer requirement. They just sell a percentage of vehicles as zero emission, whether they're work trucks or something else is up to them. A number of the trucks out there are going to have some form of power takeoff, including the zero emission ones. And so that's either going to be integrated or added to the vehicle for the vehicle to meet the functionality requirements that people need. And that's covered in the fleet requirement that if the vehicle can't perform the job function, it wouldn't be a required purchase for the fleets, but that doesn't affect the manufacturer requirement directly.
So you basically could have a plug-in hybrid or a fuel cell or a BEV that does EPTO, and that's mostly covered, it sounds like, in the fleet regulation then? The exemption?
Yeah, it's not called out separately for the manufacturer requirement. It's just the percent of sales need to be zero emission. The manufacturer can decide how to do that. And then when we use EPTO, I mean, there's a lot of different, I guess, variations that you can discuss about it. But if you're going to have a truck with some kind of mechanism that either is traditionally done with hydraulics, you're going to need some way to power that. So that can be a either a separate add-on to the vehicle or it could be integrated with the vehicle design. But in the rule, there's no separate accounting for meeting that basic functionality requirement.
And that's mainly though the secondary manufacturers doing the PTOs then.
Yeah, and it, again, depends on the vehicle category, but sure, it depends how sophisticated the body is. And again, on the question about secondary manufacturer, most of the language associated with it, because you mentioned it was 8 times, was just to make it clear that the secondary manufacturer is not going to be responsible for the sales requirement, because that's the chassis manufacturer that's responsible, not the one who does the upfitting, that would separately have an additional requirement. So it's more for clarity and some reporting is why that language is being modified, just to make
There's
it
not
more
really,
obvious.
you're not saying there's reporting requirements on the secondary manufacturers then?
No, there isn't. There would be only on the, again, that's on the primary manufacturers, because one of the changes we're proposing here is that rather than the manufacturer having to track and provide us the documentation as to where the vehicle ends up, that ultimately we would be the ones who would follow through on that element of it. And so we would want the information about where a vehicle is being delivered if it's not a complete vehicle.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dean. Next we have James Wheeler, then David Worthington. So James, I've given you permission to speak. If you can unmute and give your name and affiliation.
Hi, good morning, James Wheeler, Municipal Maintenance Equipment. Paul, Tony, good to see you here this morning. Hey, just wanted to ask a couple of clarifying questions and then also relay a message of support to Miller Industries and the tow truck industry. First question, so secondary manufacturer, currently what's going on, guys, is there is a shortage in California credits, as we've discussed before. For manufacturers outside of California, it seems to me currently with these changes, it would disincentivize the OEMs from sending California compliant trucks to dealer groups or body companies out of California because of the increased compliance requirement. So with a shortage of California available product due to ACT and the 10% requirement, how are we going to address the need for emergency vehicles that come from outside of California, even if credits are available when manufacturers choose not to purchase them or make them accessible? How do we ensure a safe pipeline of vehicles to come into California for emergency functions when they're manufactured outside of the state? That's one question. Second question lies in, again, the same problem that Miller is having, where the truck manufacturers are not allocating to their dealer groups unless those dealer groups are selling zero emission trucks. In the event that a dealer group is not capable of selling zero emission trucks, especially in the class 7, 8 and vocational marketplace, how do we ensure that critical infrastructure equipment will continue to get to California customers as is required? Because currently, if I need to build a street sweeper to clean those highways after the wrecks, like the tow truck needs to be there to clear the wreck, I can't get the truck to sell that equipment. How do we address that in these amendments? Again, how do we not penalize body companies out of California with the amendments? And how do we ensure the flow of vehicles when manufacturers are choosing not to take advantage of the credits that you say are available in surplus? Thank you.
Yeah, so I heard the comments and I'm going to take them as questions to be answered, because right now the way, well, I'll interpret the question as, yeah, if the manufacturer have the credits but they choose not to use them and are still going to not make vehicles available, how does that get addressed? Because right now it's not really the regulation that's driving it. It is being identified as a reason, but it's not a complete picture. So so we'll just take that back and see what we can learn. If we're going to do something to make big changes to this regulation, then we're not going to do it on the same timeline. And so as you guys probably are aware, we've announced other workshops that will take a longer timeline for other changes. So I'm not sure I mean, so I want to make sure that that's part of the discussion, because we're trying to make these relatively modest changes, and effectively manufacturers maybe are more familiar because they just went through the process. Is if we do something that is relatively minor, no emissions impact, then we can do it in a more expedited process. Then if we do have some significant emissions changes, then it's a whole different ball of wax, if you will, to get that done. So that's one of the things we're trying to balance by separating these more direct and relatively minor edits now, and with the other ones being that take longer in a separate rulemaking. Okay, but we'll take your comments back.
Okay, next we have David Worthington, and after that, Alex Walker. So David, I've given you permission to speak. If you could give your name and affiliation and begin.
Yeah, good morning and thank you. David Worthington with the County of Santa Clara and also the Municipal Equipment Maintenance Association. I just wanted to echo the challenge that we have with secondary manufacturers already in the state of California, where the OEM manufacturers of the chassis are requiring them to purchase a percentage of the vehicles that are gasoline, diesel, or propane, or compressed natural gas powered vehicles with a required percentage of ZEVs, whether they actually upfit or manufacture ZEVs that meet the market's needs. So these secondary manufacturers are having to distribute their costs of purchasing these ZEVs over the non-ZEVs that they do normal business with. And then in certain strange situations where fleets are having a hard time finding ZEVs, if they reach out to the secondary manufacturers, they may be purchasing a ZEV chassis from them, or a dealership may, and then we get into this weird situation where we've got a used ZEV chassis that's floating around that a private or government fleet purchases, and then is that also meeting the compliance of the ACF as far as purchasing a new ZEV? So the whole secondary market is becoming a challenge. I think it's unintended challenge, an unintended consequence from the regulations, but it's something that needs to be addressed because it's going to raise the prices of non-ZEVs for those fleets that a ZEV won't meet their requirements. Thank you.
Did you get everything? You understand that comment about you? Okay, and just before you go, I just wanted to clarify the used statement. So you were saying a dealer may end up purchasing a ZEV chassis for their own use and then turn it around and sell it to a government agency, and then the government agency wouldn't count it as their emission sale in meeting their obligation? Was that the scenario?
That's right, thank you. Yeah, what's happening is these secondary upfitters or manufacturers, they have ZEVs that they can't do anything with, such as ambulance companies. Companies receive a chassis and put an ambulance body on them. They don't have a ZEV marketplace for ZEV ambulances right now. So what they're looking at is trying to unload those ZEVs that the OEMs are requiring them to purchase, and they're looking directly to fleets or directly to dealerships that may have a hard time getting an allocation of ZEVs. So if the secondary market sells that ZEV, brand new ZEV, to a dealership, and then the dealership resells it, my interpretation and what I understand, it becomes a used vehicle with all sorts of challenges with warranties and everything else. So the concern is the secondary market selling brand new ZEV chassis to dealerships or other upfitters may create an unintended consequence where we've got ZEVs there that we want to purchase, but now they're used, and it creates all sorts of additional problems. And in the ACF regulation, I didn't see anything that addresses purchasing a used ZEV, even if it's brand new, but it's used because it's changed multiple hands.
Okay.
So
Uses. Well, there's all that, yeah. But broadly, on terms of the fleet requirements, whether you buy a new or used ZEV, it effectively counts the same.
Okay, great. So
in the fleet part, so yeah.
Okay, so we can purchase a used ZEV in lieu of a new ZEV?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, it depends on the compliance option you're using, how it's treated, but broadly, if you bought a used one or a new one, it would still effectively count towards your obligation.
Great, I appreciate the clarification.
Sure.
Okay, next we have Alex Walker, and after that, Kelly De Leon. So Alex, I have given you permission to speak. If you can give your name and affiliation.
Hi, my name is Alex Walker, the operations manager for a small family-owned company in Big Creek Lumber out of Santa Cruz, California. We've got a few retail yards, and we do timber operations and run a manufacturing plant. So we're just a small family-owned business that was lucky enough to fall into the category of a advanced clean fleet. So we're trying to figure out how to comply. I just want to make sure that we have a good understanding of what our trucks categories are. So that, like our friends that are in the towing business, our trucks run a hydraulic PTO for lumber delivery, and they're just a straight body day cab truck with a hydraulic PTO on them. We've also got dump trucks and water trucks. Can you give some clearer definitions on what categories those would fall in? Are those all specialty trucks? Are those day cab trucks? Just had a hard time nailing all those down.
I'm going to suggest that you contact our ZEV Fleet email so we can kind of get into the details with you on the truck categories and which compliance options might make the most sense for you. Do you know where?
It says you're muted. Go ahead.
Yep.
Okay. You have our ZEV Fleet email. I mean, if you use this ACT reporting email, we'll make sure it gets directed to the right person to get into the fleet specific items.
Got that. Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you, Alex. Next, we have Kelly De Leon, and after that, David Hayward. So Kelly, I've given you permission to speak. If you can unmute and begin.
Great, thank you. My name is Kelly De Leon, and I am the Assistant Sales Manager for Velocity Truck Centers, which is a dealer group for several large OEMs, including Freightliner, Western Star, Ford, and others. I just wanted to provide some additional insight into the lack of available chassis for our California customers due to the lack of the approved engines that can be sold to those folks. I believe the gentleman from Miller Industries mentioned that he received about 30% of the demand for what he needs. We are seeing similar issues from a dealership perspective due to the supply chain challenges and allocation that most dealerships have seen for the past 3 years. The backlog of demand for trucks is incredible right now, especially in the medium duty market. Many of those customers have specialized vehicles in which there is no ZEV option available for purchase today. It seems like the belief may be that the Clean Truck Partnership that was agreed upon opened up the engine availability in California. And while we understand it did improve the numbers, there is certainly still a massive shortage that we believe could have a significant impact on key infrastructure needs within California. I've received several calls from different TEMS and body companies that are seeking California engines because they've been unable to secure the quantity of chassis and California engines that they need to fulfill their business needs. So we certainly on the dealership side see a huge concern in regards to chassis availability leading into next year, and just wanted to voice that other side of the story, so to speak, to kind of support what others have been saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Next, we have David Hayward, and after that, Brad Bretker. So David, I've given you permission to speak. If you can give your name and affiliation.
Yeah, hi, good morning. David Hayward. I'm the fleet manager for the Western US for Herc Rentals. And just have some questions about the ZEV fleet milestones. Obviously path to compliance, how we're going to get there. As an example, under the I think it's the Clean Truck program, the truck check. My understanding of that program is that I need to be registering assets that have a GVWR of 14,000 and greater, and with a diesel engine. When it comes to when I'm looking at the percentage of vehicles that must be ZEV going forward, I guess I'm just trying to figure out what is my total universe. Is there a cutoff? Because we've got everything from, let's say, something like a Ranger or Colorado size pickup all the way up through Class 8 tractors. So I just hope to get some clarification on what's my universe? Are we talking diesel only over a certain GVW? Do I include, or is gasoline vehicles included? So thank you.
Thanks, David. So I guess for advanced clean fleets, it applies to all vehicles regardless of fuel type over 8,500 pounds GVWR. In addition, off-road yard tractors and light-duty parcel delivery vehicles. And again, we do recommend for any questions about the advanced clean fleets rule, we have a ZEV fleet at arb.ca.gov email that will be able to answer any questions you have, and we have multiple staff manning that.
Yeah, and I'd also encourage people to look at some of the fact sheets that we have and even some videos on these kinds of questions so you have a good understanding of what your universe so that we can narrow to any other details that you might need.
Okay, we'll go to our next commenter. So we have Brad. I've given you permission to speak. After that, Tom Folks.
Good morning. This is Brad Bredisher from New Flyer Motor Coach Industries. We're a producer of transit bus and motor coaches that would be covered under the excluded bus definition. And I just noticed in slide 22, you have some updated reporting requirements that include excluded bus now, whereas before it was not included. I believe actually in the past, we did try to submit reports a couple of years ago and was informed that we weren't to report. So just curious as to the reasoning why it's included now and what that would mean going forward.
Thanks. Yeah, I can hear. Yeah, so I think we did add some in terms of the categories to select to put an excluded bus. I think broadly we want to just clarify the requirements remain the same where manufactured more than 500 sales would need to report. Those who under 500 sales would report optionally. We have added a requirement in the reporting section to report whether or not about the vehicle type, which includes excluded bus. This is really to help us understand these cases where some manufacturers have reported excluded buses, which are not eligible to earn these credits. So it's really meant to improve the clarity in the regulation. Anything else to add there?
Oh, okay, so it's an optional at this point.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, I guess credits would not be accumulated for those excluded buses, even if they are reported.
That's correct. And we just want to make sure to prevent those types of situations because when we developed advanced clean trucks, we're trying to focus more on the trucking sector. On the buses, we do have our innovative clean transit regulation. So we want to make sure we're getting increasing volumes of zero emission trucks.
Yeah, if it helps, at least for a little history. I mean, we started doing some of the zero emission regulations. The innovative clean transit was one of those. And there's almost any kind of bus you can think of is already available as zero emission. So there was no need to go put a requirement on the manufacturer to make them available since they widely were. And pretty much every configuration you can think of, including double decker and motor coach, and obviously the various transit categories. And they tend to be the smaller volume anyway. So they weren't included in this manufacturer sales requirement.
All right, thank you. That makes it clear.
Okay, next we have Tom Folks, and after that, Lacey Robertson. So I've given Tom permission to speak. If you give your name and affiliation and begin.
Yeah, hi, Tom Folks. I am with a company called Mightycom, and I have had my question answered. So thank you. I will let you reclaim this time.
Okay, thank you, Tom. And next we have Lacey Robertson, who is the last hand we have raised at the moment.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Lacey Robertson with Rush Enterprises. Thank you guys for hosting this workshop. I was wondering, could you return to slide 20? That'd be possible.
Yeah, just give us a moment.
Well, as we're doing that, I can jump in with my question. It's really for Tony. My understanding from what you said during the slide was that the OEM would be responsible for sub-bullet number 1 in terms of reporting the vehicles that were produced for sale for California. And then that sub-bullet number 2 would be CARB would be responsible for that. Did I understand that correctly?
If I'm remembering the right one, I mean, essentially by removing the requirement that the manufacturer provide us with the information and the records that show where the vehicle got to the ultimate purchaser, by dropping that as a requirement, then for us to ultimately verify that the vehicle was in fact sold into California, would that responsibility effectively falls on us to ultimately do that verification. And so that's why we're asking for the information so that we can know its last point of sale, which might not have been to the ultimate purchaser, so that we can verify ultimately that the vehicles were in fact being placed in California.
Okay, so how will that occur? How will CARB do that?
And let me add, I guess, to what I was saying. And so part of that is to make sure that we're effectively doing something that's emissions neutral. So if you get the same vehicles here and we just change who is ultimately documenting the final location, then you're not changing the emissions in any way. So how would that happen? I mean, through a variety of means. I mean, part of the reason that I think we've identified knowing where the last point of sale was is to start picking up the trail at that point, and to verify where those sales are.
Okay, so
follow the same paper trail that the manufacturer would in essence follow.
Okay, so will CARB be reaching out to the purchasers, or I guess I'm trying to understand how that paper trail would work, or would you be, if it's not, you're not going through the OEM, I'm just a little confused. Because if those numbers are different, if the OEM is reporting one thing and then CARB determines something else, does that mean CARB is ultimately the one responsible for figuring out how many credits and deficits are accrued?
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to put it. I mean, I'll look at it as, I mean, the manufacturers are responsible to make sure that they meet the compliance obligations, and that is based on vehicles being delivered and placed in service in California. And so if we're changing the reporting requirement to an extent, that still needs to happen, because at the end of the day, that's how we get the emission benefits. And so then I mean, the question you're asking is, it really depends on the details as to if the vehicle was delivered as a complete vehicle directly to the ultimate purchaser, if it was delivered to a dealer lot, or was it ultimately delivered for upfit by somebody, whether they're in state or out of state, but ultimately the vehicle being placed in California. All of those need to be followed, and there are going to be different ways to track that.
Okay. And then in the, thank you for that clarification. So, and then for the retention, the change in the language for the retention of records section, the numbered list has the last, before number 7, it has the word "and." Does that mean that it's supposed to be inclusive? So for every transaction, the OEM is required to retain all of those, or should that be an "or," as those are each individually accepted documents?
Thank you for catching that. That is supposed to be an "or," so it's any of the above, not all of the above.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Okay.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to say, because I think we are getting close to the end here, but yeah, so these are preliminary language that we put out. We figured we might save some time if we can start with here's a draft, and let's fix the boo-boos and make any adjustments as necessary, so that when we put out a formal draft where the comments would be reviewed by the board and everything else, that at that stage that presumably we might be all on the exact same page. And so this was one of our ways to try to save a little time, if you will, is to put this out right now, rather than having a general workshop with just the description without the language, so that we could identify anything we might have missed now. Because again, to meet the timeline we're shooting for, our staff report effectively has to be written very soon. And obviously they need changes to the language as well. And so this gives us a head start. So again, I think we gave you the email address to use. By the end of the month, if we get that in, then we can very easily address any of the issues, I think. And then, and for us to meet a March timeline, then we'll have to put out a staff report and so on. And so much later than the end of the month is going to make it harder to incorporate changes. So, anybody else?
I don't see any more hands up at the moment. Okay, and we have one in-person commenter.
See if there's anybody else.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I'm Manoj Bhagwat from Packard. We make heavy, medium heavy duty and heavy duty trucks under the brand of Peterbilt and Kenworth. Our group is led by Cynthia Webb. She is here. Our question is about the reporting. We have submitted model year 21 and 22 reports, and it looks like there are changes coming up in the reporting structure. So our question is, when we can see that change, and as also will that impact our model year 21 and 22 reports, which we already submitted?
Yeah, so in principle, with us going for a decision in the early March timeframe, we won't finalize the changes till the end of 2024 go through the Office of Administrative Law. So my presumption is, no, this doesn't affect what you've already reported, and wouldn't affect your 2023 model year sales. Either it would be the 24 model year sales that would then affect the reporting for 2024.
Okay, and also last year you introduced a new website to upload and report, and we requested that somehow there are some issues with the site and reporting. So it will be helpful. Our request is that if you count us during when you develop a new template and request for our input, that will be helpful.
Yeah, and I'd encourage, so one of the things that we are doing with some of these changes that might not be as obvious, we went back to the EPA reports and try to mimic exactly what you're already reporting for phase 2 and for California, to make them as identical as possible. So if there's anything that's slightly different, by all means, let's even make that. Because what we're trying to work towards is, in essence, if you're already reporting sales for phase 2 and maybe even a phase 3, and for omnibus and for us, because for ACT, you still have to report all your combustion and your ZEV sales. It might as well be a single report that covers all of those bases. So if we can work towards that, I think everybody would benefit from that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and then we'll make a note to follow up on any issues that the current system has. If there's anything that we can do about that, we can make sure we take care of it for the next report.
Yeah, we understand that previously it was announced that we can see what we submitted, but somehow in the system we are unable to see what we have submitted.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, we're working with the contractor to get that fixed here in the near future.
That wasn't working for everybody?
The dashboard, yeah. So
okay. So sorry. Okay. Then I guess we'll try to make sure that gets prioritized a little higher, because that's something that's a core function of the system.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we have one more comment online. So just last call, everyone, if you have anything you want to say, so now's the best time. So Dan Potter, I've given you permission to speak. If you can give your name, affiliation, and begin.
Yeah, this is Dan Potter from Daimler Truck North America. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I really want to thank I want to thank the team at CARB for working with manufacturers on the Clean Trucks Partnership and trying to work towards some solutions to some of these technical issues that I think we can resolve. One question, and I don't know if there's an answer today, and maybe it's just something we need to work on together, but I'm looking at the retention of records, and maybe this goes back to one of the earlier questions. There's sort of a number of different records that CARB would like various parties to retain to hopefully determine which vehicle is produced and delivered for sale in California, including a vehicle registration in California, documentation from a secondary vehicle manufacturer showing delivery into California, an invoice or receipt showing an order for California. I mean, there's a number of different ways that you could prove a vehicle is in California. And I'm wondering what CARB's intention is for what is the final arbiter of, yes, this vehicle is in California. Because like we definitely have evidence of vehicles that are registered in one state, but delivered to one other state, but put into service into a third state. And so all of these records could conflict with each other. And I'm struggling trying to figure out how we ensure our compliance and how CARB will ensure that we know what the method of predicting that compliance is. So thank you for any comments on that topic.
Yeah, at this point, I'd say, so as you kind of see, we've identified different ways because there are different ways that the vehicles get assembled and ultimately placed. So anything that anyone sees there that we can improve to make that more straightforward or make sure we didn't miss any particular relatively common way of building and placing a vehicle, I would encourage that. I think beyond that, I mean, I think that's part of the ongoing discussion is ultimately how to verify the different, lack of a better term, scenarios in terms of how vehicles are assembled. And how they're ordered too, because when you place an order, we think that's a pretty firm commitment to take the delivery of the vehicle, but we also recognize that vehicles are upfit in various states and ultimately placed in California, and in some cases upfit in California and placed in other states. And so we're trying to be mindful of all of those examples so that ultimately we get the emission reductions here that we need to see occur here.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Tony, and maybe we can have some more discussions. I guess my question is more about what happens when they're in conflict with each other, because there are vehicles that are registered in Indiana or in Delaware that are delivered to California that are placed into service. I don't know where, potentially in California, but I don't have, without GPS information or something, I don't know where it's placed into service. And I guess I'm trying to figure out which thing matters.
Yeah, so I don't know that I have the direct answer. I mean, to a degree, that's going to be partly it's going to vary with the situation and what those conflicts might look like. Just because something that might not say the same thing, that may or may not be a conflict. It could just be another step in the placement of the vehicle, for example.
It sounds like a topic maybe EMA and CARB could work on together more. Because
I think we'll.
I do think.
Yeah, I know there's other discussions with that. I mean, things are a little different, as most of you might be aware. With the omnibus regulation, the California standard is different than the federal standard, where they've effectively been aligned for a very long time. And so that's changing the picture a little bit to deal with the fact that we do have a different standard now, starting in 24, than what is an EPA certified engine otherwise. So all of these issues are becoming more prevalent, where before it didn't matter so much because they were all effectively the same or pretty close to the same.
Understood. And I'm looking forward to further communication on it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That was our last commenter, I believe. I guess Jim, you're when can you just give me a thumbs up? Okay. Anyone else in the room would like to speak? Okay, I think that's it for the meeting.
Yeah, thank you all for attending, those of you who came. And we'll look to see you at the next meetings because we have a number coming. Thank you.